In the cold winter skies of 1943, whispers began to spread through the ranks of the Luftwaffe. German pilots spoke in hushed voices about a phantom, a machine that moved like lightning and vanished like smoke. By the time they saw it, it was already behind them. They named it the Geisteradler, the Ghost Eagle. No one knew where it came from, but every man who faced it never forgot it. But this ghost wasn't born in Germany. It came from the factories of America, from a dream, and from desperation. For years, Allied bombers had been slaughtered in the European skies. The Luftwaffe's Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs tore through their formations, leaving burning trails across the horizon. Every mission deep into enemy territory meant watching your comrades vanish into fire. Morale was collapsing, and the Allies needed a miracle. That miracle began inside a noisy, crowded workshop in Inglewood, California. The name on the building read North American Aviation. The U.S. Army Air Forces had demanded the impossible. Build us a fighter that can fly to Berlin, protect our bombers, and come home alive. The engineers didn't sleep. They ate at their desks, worked under dim lamps, and lived among the smell of oil and metal. They knew what was at stake. Each bolt they tightened, each wing they shaped, could mean hundreds of lives saved or lost. And somewhere among those sleepless nights, the shape of a legend began to appear. At first, it was nothing but a sketch, labeled an A73X. But when its engine roared for the first time, men stopped what they were doing and stared. The sound was deep, thunderous, and full of promise. The test pilot who took it up that day returned pale and shaking. He stepped down from the cockpit and said only one line. "This isn't a plane ... It's a living creature." The Ghost Eagle had taken flight, and the world would never be the same. But before it could earn its name, it had to survive. The British Royal Air Force agreed to test the prototype, and they soon realized its potential. Fast, agile, and deadly, it could climb higher and turn tighter than almost anything in the air. Still, it lacked one thing: the heart. Then came the Merlin engine, borrowed from Britain's own Spitfire. Once the new heart was fitted, the Ghost Eagle truly came alive. Now, it could fly farther, faster, and strike with surgical precision. The Allies finally had a weapon that could challenge Germany's rule of the skies, but no one yet knew how deadly it would become. The Ghost Eagle was ready for war. The men who built it prayed it would bring their boys home alive. And soon, across the grey European clouds, the hunters would become the hunted. The legend was about to begin. The dawn over England was grey and heavy with mist. On the airfields of the 8th Air Force, rows of silver planes waited, engines rumbling like thunder. Among them stood a new shape, sharper, sleeker, faster. It was time for the Ghost Eagle to face its destiny. For months, American bombers had flown deep into German airspace and never returned. Their escorts could only follow so far before running out of fuel, leaving them defenseless over enemy territory. But this new machine, the P-51 Mustang, could go the distance. It carried fuel deep in its wings and fury in its heart. It was no longer just a prototype. It was the future of air combat. The first mission began in silence. As the sun climbed, the bombers took off, hundreds of them, flying in formation like migrating birds of war. And behind them, like shadows in the mist, came the Ghost Eagles. Their pilots, young men barely out of high school, gripped their controls with trembling hands. They'd been told this plane could outrun and outfight anything Germany had, but no one knew for sure. Until that morning, halfway to Berlin, the radar lit up. The Luftwaffe was coming. Dozens of German fighters dropped from the clouds, their black crosses flashing in the sunlight. For years, this was the moment the bombers dreaded. But this time, something was different. The Ghost Eagles broke formation and dove. Their Merlin engines screamed like banshees as they fell from the heavens. The German pilots never saw them coming. In seconds, the sky became a storm of fire and metal. Tracer rounds danced across the horizon, engines exploded, and parachutes blossomed in the cold air. One German ace shouted over the radio, "They move like spirits. We can't see them until they strike." That day, the Americans claimed victory after victory. The Luftwaffe was stunned, their arrogance shattered. The Ghost Eagle had arrived, and it hunted without mercy. Back at base, when the first Mustangs returned, the crews couldn't believe what they saw. Planes that usually came back torn apart now landed almost untouched. Pilots stepped down grinning, their faces streaked with sweat and gunpowder. They had seen the future, and they were flying it. News spread quickly, all across Europe. Bomber crews began whispering prayers of gratitude for the new escorts. They called them angels of the sky, and the Germans, they called them ghosts. But war is never merciful. Each flight meant risking death in frozen air miles above the earth. Even the best pilots could vanish in a heartbeat, and every time a Ghost Eagle was lost, another young American name was etched into the stone of history. Still, the tide had turned. For the first time, the Allies controlled the air. Factories deep in Germany began to burn, and the once invincible Luftwaffe began to crumble under the weight of the phantom they couldn't stop, the Ghost Eagle. By the spring of 1944, the skies over Europe had become a graveyard. Twisted metal rained from the heavens, and the air smelled of fuel, fire, and fear. But above it all, one sound began to echo through the clouds, the distinct roar of the Ghost Eagle's Merlin engine. Every German pilot who heard it knew what came next. The Luftwaffe was desperate. Their once dominant fighters were now being hunted. They scrambled Me-109s and FW-190s in waves, but the Mustangs came in faster, sharper, deadlier. The hunter had become the hunted. On March 6, 1944, the Allies launched a massive daylight bombing raid, the first all-out strike on Berlin itself. Hundreds of bombers filled the sky like a steel storm. Below, anti-aircraft guns thundered. Above, German fighters rose in swarms to intercept. But this time, the bombers were not alone. The Ghost Eagles flew ahead, slicing through the clouds, searching for their prey. When the Luftwaffe appeared, the Mustangs descended like divine wrath. Dogfights erupted across the sky, spinning, burning duels that stretched 4 miles. Each burst of gunfire painted the air with sparks and smoke. Pilots screamed into their radios as the chaos swallowed them whole. Captain Don Blakesley, one of the finest Mustang leaders, remembered that day. The sky was alive. You couldn't tell friend from foe half the time. But the Mustang, she was faster, steadier. She could dance in ways the Germans never expected. By noon, the Germans were retreating. Their formation shattered, their morale broken. For the first time, the Luftwaffe's legendary aces began to fall, one after another. That day, the Allies didn't just bomb Berlin. They shattered the myth of German air superiority. Voice. In the debriefing rooms, pilots spoke quietly about what they'd seen. Some couldn't stop shaking. Others laughed, not out of joy, but disbelief that they were still alive. The Ghost Eagle had proven itself. It wasn't just a plane. It was a message that America's spirit could not be broken, and its ingenuity could rewrite the rules of war. From that point on, the Mustang became a symbol of freedom and fear. Freedom for the bombers who finally reached their targets. Fear for the Germans who looked up and saw silver wings cutting through the sun. But behind every victory lay a shadow. Every pilot knew that one mistake, one bullet, one flicker of engine failure could turn triumph into tragedy. They fought knowing that survival was borrowed time, and yet they climbed back into the cockpit day after day. Because someone had to bring the bombers home, the Ghost Eagle had turned the tide of war. But the worst battles were still to come. Ahead lay Normandy, D-Day, and the final reckoning that would decide the fate of Europe. June 6, 1944, the world held its breath. Thousands of ships crossed the English Channel, carrying the hopes of an entire generation. It was D-Day, the day that would decide the fate of Europe. And above those ships flew the Ghost Eagles. The P-51 Mustangs soared low over the beaches, engines screaming, wings glinting in the dawn. Their mission was simple: protect the invasion from the sky, destroy anything that threatened the men below. But the Luftwaffe wasn't done yet. From the distant clouds, German fighters appeared, desperate to stop the tide. And once again, the ghosts descended. Dogfights erupted over the beaches of Normandy. The roar of engines, mixed with the thunder of artillery from below. Pilots fought at treetop level, weaving between smoke and tracer fire. Every move was a gamble between life and death. But the Mustang pilots had something the Germans didn't: belief. Belief that this was more than just a mission. It was liberation itself. Major George Preddy, one of the finest Mustang aces, described it best. You could see the invasion ships below, thousands of them. We knew that, if we failed up here, every man down there could die. So we fought like hell. In a single morning, the Ghost Eagles shot down dozens of enemy planes. The Luftwaffe tried wave after wave, but they couldn't break through. The skies belonged to the Allies now, and for the first time since 1939, the Germans looked up and saw defeat coming from the clouds. As the invasion rolled forward, the Mustangs became the eyes and sword of the Allied army. They strafed enemy convoys, cut off reinforcements, and destroyed supply lines deep behind enemy lines. Every day, the Ghost Eagles flew low through flak and fire, marking the path of freedom with trails of smoke. But even legends bleed. Many never came home. Planes vanished in flames, names lost to the sea. The war was turning in the Allies' favor, but the price was high. On one mission, a young pilot's radio crackled with static. His voice came through: "Combat final. Tell my folks the Mustang flew true." Moments later, his plane disappeared into a wall of smoke. The other pilots said nothing. They just kept flying. The Ghost Eagle had become more than a fighter plane. It was a symbol of courage, sacrifice, and the relentless will to win. Every Mustang in the sky carried not just bullets, but the prayers of millions waiting for freedom. As Allied troops pushed deeper into France, the Ghost Eagles followed, guarding them from above. Wherever the thunder of engines roared, hope followed, and the phantom that once haunted the Luftwaffe now haunted every shadow of the collapsing Third Reich. By 1945, the world was burning out. Cities lay in ruins, armies were shattered, and skies once filled with war machines were now silent. But the Ghost Eagle, the P-51 Mustang, still flew. It had seen the war from the beginning to the bitter end. It had carried boys into battle and brought heroes home in pieces of steel and memory. The Luftwaffe was nearly gone, their proud squadrons reduced to fragments. Every remaining German pilot knew the sound of that Merlin engine, that haunting roar that meant death was near. They no longer hunted the Mustangs. They hid from them. In those final months, the Ghost Eagles flew deeper into the heart of Germany than ever before. They attacked supply trains, ammunition depots, and convoys trying to escape the chaos. The Mustang became the blade that cut through the last defenses of the Nazi Empire. But behind every victory was exhaustion. The pilots were tired, not just in body, but in soul. They had seen too much death, too much loss, and they knew that every mission could still be their last. On April 16, 1945, a squadron of Ghost Eagles took off from England for one of their final missions. Their target, a retreating German column outside Dresden. Among them was Captain Robert Stone, a pilot who had flown more than 100 missions without a single hit to his plane. He was called Lucky Stone. That morning, the sky was clear, the air thin and cold. They flew low over the trees, guns loaded, hearts heavy. They found the target and Dovers won. In seconds, the road turned into a storm of explosions and dust. But then, out of nowhere, German anti-aircraft fire ripped through the air. One shell found its mark. Stone's Mustang burst into flames. His wingman's radio crackled with his final words: "Don't cry for me, boys." The Eagles flying home. Seconds later, the plane disappeared into the forest below. When the war finally ended weeks later, the surviving pilots stood in silence. No cheers, no parades, just the sound of wind brushing against the empty runways. They had won, but at a price no one could measure. The Ghost Eagle had done what it was born to do. It haunted the skies, broke an empire, and became a legend. Even the enemy respected it. Captured German pilots would later say, "When we saw the silver wings of the Mustang, we knew God had switched sides." Years passed. The factories that once built the Ghost Eagles fell silent, but their echoes remained, in museums, in photographs, and in the hearts of the men who flew them. Every time one of those old engines starts again at an air show, veterans look up with tears in their eyes, because for a moment the ghost eagle returns, and in that sound, that deep, proud roar of the Merlin engine, the spirits of the fallen still fly, haunting the skies they once owned.